Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. This podcast is sponsored by Collins, high-quality student books, teacher guides and unbeatable value revision for GCSE and A-level sociology. If you'd like to see what they've got on offer, then please do visit collins.co.uk and search for sociology. The Sociology Show podcast is also brought to you in association with Tutor2U Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. So you can see what they've got on offer. Please do go to tutor2u.net/sociology, and there you can pick up revision guides, you can get flashcards, you can get revision videos, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so my guest for this episode was Dr. Ben Milbourn. So without further ado, let's go over to the interview. Hi, thank you very much for coming on the Sociology Show. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, thanks for inviting me on, Matthew. My name's Dr. Ben Milbourn. I'm an occupational therapist and I'm a senior lecturer in the Curtin School of Allied Health at Curtin University in Perth, Western Australia.
Thanks, Ben. So I was just trying to work out a time difference. How far ahead are you?
We're actually 8 hours ahead of you guys. So it's I think 2:40 in the afternoon in the UK. So it's 9:40 p.m. here. Yeah,
it's grey and miserable here. So go on, make me jealous. What's it like?
Well, dare I say it, we're sort of coming into sort of autumn, but Western Australia, we do kind of get a lot of hot weather. Autumn is kind of looking like 21 degrees at the moment at sort of 9:40 at night. But as you might know, we on the eastern states around Queensland, we've had a lot of flooding. In South Australia, we've had bushfires. So, not to jump on the bandwagon of climate change, but certainly we're seeing a lot of changes around our climate at the moment.
Yeah, understandable. Now, Ben, since we've been in touch trying to sort out our little meeting, we realised that our paths not just crossed, but pretty clashed, actually. We worked out both did sociology, both at the same university, and not only that, but at the same time as well.
I know it's. I suppose just Matthew, it's been so wonderful listening to your podcast, and I don't even know how I kind of found it on the Apple Podcast service, and it was just it's been so great to listen to all the different guests, and as you're quite right, we were there together in Portsmouth in the 90s, and. Wow, what an experience. It was such an eye-opener, that course, and to have the scope and opportunity to study different aspects of sociology. And I think in one of our conversations we were talking about Keith Tester, and for me the journey really does start with Keith, and I think we sat in his first semester lecture and him trying to explain, I always remember this, adiaphorization and how that kind of influences people, and wow, it's you're taking me right back there, Matthew.
Yeah, Keith Tester is a standout lecturer for me by a long way. Firstly, he was a fellow Brighton fan, which meant I got on with him quite well. But to be able to stand at the front of the lecture theatre and talk for 1 hour with no notes and keep every single person engaged, what a kind of, not just an academic, but what a performer.
Oh, the guy was just he was really down to earth, but he was, it was just dare I say it, you know, he was erudite. He could talk, and the depth he could go into around topics like moral culture. Obviously, you know, he had a real strong interest in Zygmunt Bauman's work, and really understood his work and could kind of, you know, unpack it and explain it in a way that people could relate to it.
Yeah, and he did a 1 hour lecture on René Descartes, I think, Therefore I Am, just breaking it down and explaining it. And it still lives long in the memory. Sadly, passed away a few years ago. So rest in peace, Keith.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I was really sad to read that. No, great guy.
Yeah, and I think it shows a lot that just how inspirational a teacher or a lecturer can be. You know, we're talking 25 years plus later, and it's still sat firmly in our memories.
Absolutely, and you know, the way he was able, I remember this, I think in one of the lectures, him talking about and very relevant to, you know, what we're seeing today, what's happening in Ukraine. So what are you going to do about it? And talking about moral indifference and talking about how, easy people can kind of be disconnected. And I think he was very attuned to almost kind of seeing what was kind of coming next. And I think that's something about sociology. It gives us the tools to look and analyse to see how things kind of might sort of develop and shape. Yeah,
and you're right. His kind of key philosophy is not just to learn about it, but to try and change it. I think if it was up to Keith, he would have changed the world. You know, it was an inspiration. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. That's a lovely introduction. So let's get stuck into a little bit more about yourself. So, occupational therapy, one of those terms that people have heard. Should we break it down to the basics? What actually is occupational therapy?
That's the $64 million question, Matthew. Well, I can give you the theoretical answer, or I can try and do what Keith used to do and give you the layman answer. So, occupational therapists, they're really interested in what is the art and like the science of enabling participation in everyday activities or everyday lives. So what do I mean by that? Well, occupational therapy certainly is about working with people who might be experiencing an illness, an injury, a disability, an impairment, and working with them to perhaps look at how they're doing it. So the way they might be performing that everyday occupation, that could be something around self-care. So, for example, being able to wash yourself, being able to dress yourself. It might be around participation, and we know that, you know, participation in social activities, it fosters a sense of well-being. It fosters a sense of identity. It fosters a sense of being kind of connected with other people. So engaging in leisure occupations, we know they're good for us. But it also could be around productivity and look, you know, trying to avoid the real capitalist definition of productivity. We do think about productivity as just work, but what about volunteering? What about for people who are in caring roles, looking after other people, how that might be defined around productivity? So occupational therapists will work with the person, with the strengths and perhaps the identified needs, or I don't like to use the word deficits, but the things that perhaps they're having some difficulty with. And often we will look at where they're doing that. So the environment for an occupational therapist is really, really important. And how we look at the environment. So the social environment, obviously who's in that social environment, and it could be going from the micro, you know, family members, friends, to the macro. So the people that we connect with through, say, social media, say through organisations, through clubs, through the people that we work with. But not just the social environment, there might be aspects such as the physical environment. So perhaps what are the difficulties? So let's say you're working with somebody who perhaps is using a wheelchair, and the physical environment acts as a barrier for that person to be able to get to work. As an occupational therapist, you're using these skills of art and science to understand what are perhaps the enablers or barriers for that person participating or not participating in that valued occupation. I hope that you've got the technical and you've got the lay there, Matthew. So I hope that's not too specific.
No, that's great. And I was just thinking, so sort of, what does the day in the life of an occupational therapist look like? I mean, I imagine it's different depending on who you're working with, but what do you actually do day to day, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And again, I think in our conversation, our paths have definitely crossed in places where we've lived as well. So I trained as an occupational therapist at University of Brighton after I did my sociology degree. So I come in as a graduate entry masters. We call them in Australia graduate entry masters, but I think it's something else in the UK. And I did a 2-year graduate, postgraduate diploma of occupational therapy and a master's degree at the same time. And after I finished my training, I went and worked in a variety of different settings. So I worked for social services. And the day in the life working in social services, you might be going out to people's homes and you might be carrying out an assessment. And I'm always a bit wary about using this word assessment, because assessment always kind of says, you know, is there a right answer, is there a wrong answer? But in the mind of an occupational therapist, assessment is about information gathering. Because from that information gathering, you are thinking around them, okay, what are the enablers? What are perhaps stopping that person being able to get upstairs to use their bathroom? And how is perhaps their impairment impacting on that ability? So you'd go out to somebody's home, you would get to know them, because it's no good just sort of knocking on the door, right, I'm coming in, I'm doing an assessment. You've got to build a relationship, and what we mean around therapeutic relationships. So like we're kind of doing at the moment, kind of getting to know one another, having a conversation which is leading somewhere. And in this case, it's collecting that information to help you understand perhaps what are the strengths and needs of that person. From that, you would perhaps make some recommendations, and in that role in social services, we might provide some equipment. So let's perhaps think about somebody who maybe's had a hip replacement and they're having some difficulty getting on and off their toilet. You might think about by looking, well, when they're getting on off the toilet, perhaps it's taking a lot of energy or strength for them to get up. Well, what can you do around changing that environment? You might provide a raised toilet seat, or you might provide a frame around the toilet, which again is changing that environment to enable that person to be not only safe, but independent as well. So that might be just an example in, say, social services. In a mental health setting, and I worked in mental health in the UK and worked alongside people who experienced mental health needs and difficulties. It really would depend. Again, you might be going out to people's homes. You might be thinking around perhaps where they have been experiencing some difficulty around their anxiety, and going out and doing things like shopping. And the feelings, the emotions associated with that anxiety might be stopping that person going out and doing that shopping. As the occupational therapist, you'd work with that person to identify perhaps some triggers. And we often frame it, and some of your listeners might have heard of cognitive behavioural therapy. So we would use aspects of cognitive behavioural therapy to work with that person to identify potential triggers and look at strategies around practicing. And we in occupational therapy, we often use aspects called graded exposure. So we don't take the person down to the to Sainsbury's or Tesco's when it's really busy on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. You might think about going at a quieter time. So you build that person's confidence and awareness around what's happening in that environment, what are that person's strengths. I like to think, particularly in the mental health aspect, we work really closely with psychologists, and psychologists, talk a lot around strategies, particularly around cognitive behavioural therapy. But I always think occupational therapists, we are the people that are actually doing that with that person. We're out in that shopping centre, we're getting on that public transport. when I used to work in inpatient mental health settings, we were using things like boxing, or we were using mountain biking as a way of engaging people in their recovery. And in mental health contexts in particular, in the UK, Australia, the US, the recovery framework is a really big, I suppose, paradigm shift in terms of how we understand and how we approach mental health and supporting people with their mental health needs.
Yeah, and I know one of the areas that you focus on in particular is autism and adolescent autistic children in particular. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the research?
Yeah. Well, so I did my PhD after moving to Australia, and so I was working clinically in a mental health setting. And so my PhD actually looked at people who used specifically assertive outreach services, and it was a really fantastic experience. I got to used a lot of qualitative methodology, and then I finished my PhD. And at the time, it was really hard to kind of connect with other people, particularly researching in that area of mental health. And in our university, I was really fortunate to be, I suppose, taken under the wing of our group, who are the Curtin Autism Research Group, and they are such a wonderful group. They have a lot of outreach research programs, which specifically are about supporting autistic individuals in the community. And one program I think I mentioned to you was around working alongside autistic adolescents. And we often hear, particularly around the autism community, there's a lot of discussion around the term neurodiversity, and it's, again, like what I was saying around the recovery framework, it's a paradigm shift in how we think about autism and how we think about supporting autistic individuals. So what I mean by that is, rather than focusing on what the person can't do, it's about tapping into the strengths, the interests, the passions of the person. And I'm not going to make any kind of wide sweeping statement here, but certainly in our community, we've had a lot of interest of people who are autistic, who have a strong passion around computer coding, around technology, around STEM. And our group basically built this community program where autistic adolescents come along on a Saturday morning. They're able to connect with other autistic individuals of their own age. They're able to have some fun, and also they're able to develop that strength, that passion, as a pathway into further training, and that could be going into workplace and work experience, going on to further education, and in some cases, some of our members have actually gone on and got jobs from that.
That's interesting. Could I ask you something about that, Ben? I'm really interested in those terms. You mentioned neurodiverse and neurotypical we hear as well. I always find that really difficult. Is there such thing as a typical brain, and isn't everyone diverse? Do you know what I mean? Am I overcomplicating that or simplifying that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and certainly there's been a lot more research in the last 30 years around what particularly what we understand around autism and neurodiversity. And neurodiversity, I think that it is about seeing that people are different and that our brains are different. And I think it is this shift, and there's been a change, particularly moving from this medical model of diagnosis of a disorder rather than actually celebrating that difference. And I think that's really been changed. There's a wonderful TED talk by a collaborator of ours called Jack Den Houting, and it's on YouTube, TED talk, and I would really encourage your listeners to have a look at that. And Jack is somebody who is autistic and neurodiverse, and I think she could probably articulate it better than I am. I'm not autistic. I'm actually a parent of an autistic child, and so again, I think that drives my own kind of passion around how we perhaps look at it and how we focus on strengths rather than perhaps deficit.
Yeah, agreed. Because I was even thinking, two people that fall into neurotypical could be very, very different. It doesn't mean that, two people falling into, classed as autism, that's such a huge spectrum as well, isn't it?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Matthew. The idea that it is a spectrum, and that the presentation of what that looks like is going to be different. So, if I use the example of my son, how my son presents with perhaps some of his, I don't want to say behaviours, I would say just some of the things that make him who he is. It's quite different perhaps to some of the other kids in his class or school who may be autistic and present with other things. A good example perhaps might be when we go to the beach, and perhaps when my son, gets a little bit stressed, he will often sensory seek, and he'll put his hands in the sand, and that kind of, playing with the sand and touching it gives him that ability to self-regulate or emotionally regulate. And there's a lot of work, and our group are actually currently involved in that at the moment, around looking at how emotional regulation is kind of understood, and in particular, one of our collaborators who is also autistic, and a big part of our research, we really try and work alongside. We use a methodology called co-production. Dr Ben Milbourn, who's from the UK and is based in Australia now, and wrote quite a few books around autism and gender identity as well. When and other people, they're really interested in looking at mental health from the perspective of an autistic individual, rather than mental health as a kind of broad umbrella which reaches out to everybody. So, what does that mean? Well, perhaps somebody who is autistic and is experiencing significant mental health need, they might be turning up at accident and emergency. They might perhaps need that support. But other people who the clinicians are trying to support are using perhaps a one lens, where really it's kind of saying there might be different lenses of understanding and supporting that person. A really interesting concept, particularly which ties in, I think, to mental health, is around autistic burnout and masking or camouflaging. So the amount of emotional and perhaps physical energy that goes in to perhaps camouflaging into a typical environment that somebody who's autistic may have to use, that may result in burnout, which then negatively impacts that person's mental health.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
You just mentioned co-production. What do you just want to say a little bit more? What is co-production and how is it used in research?
Yeah, so that's something our group have really took to our heart, and our actual kind of on our website, it is really, it comes from the US, but it was adopted in the UK under the social model of disability framework. Nothing about us without us. So if you're going to do research with the people you're trying to study, you should be inviting them from the very start. And it shouldn't be tokenistic. It should be that you're not just having people to advise, but you're paying them, and you're paying them a competitive rate, that you'll have involving those people with that lived experience from the very start, and they are guiding and shaping that intervention with what outcome you get. So it may be that you're doing that research, and the result you get or the feedback you get might not be what you want to hear. But if you're doing true co-produced research, then you're doing it from the start. So Dr Ben Milbourn, who I mentioned, we were involved in a project in Australia. So in Australia, we have something called the Australian Collaborative Research Centre, and we have one specifically for which looks at autism. And we had a grant from them, and when the call out specifically said that you have to have somebody with lived experience in your team, and it's not tokenistic, and you're involving them. So we had Wen on board from the very start for this Photo Voice project, and the project actually looked at quality of life for autistic adults in Australia. And what we did was we set the study up where we interviewed adults all over Australia about what they determined was quality of life. But then the next stage of that was we were able to get them to take pictures. And again, this comes back to that neurodiverse perspective that autistic individuals perhaps using their understanding of the world to tell a different story. So, and I'm very happy again to share this with your listeners. We actually had a online art gallery of all the pictures that the participants took off, and like again, themes which kind of come out of that Photo Voice exhibition was around belonging, was around relationships. There was a focus on support needs, and in Australia, the way disability services are set up has been there's been a significant change. We have something called the National Disability Insurance Scheme over here. So the idea that somebody having funding to get a support worker to support their participation in that valued activity or occupation, which they're taking a picture of, say, well, by me attending this activity, this really adds to my quality of life.
And I'm going to use a little bit of a cliche, Ben, but from everything you've described, the work you're involved in occupational therapy and the projects, challenging but rewarding. Is that fair?
I think kind of the world we're in at the moment, everything is probably a little bit challenging and rewarding. I think, to me, the driver is about making difference in our community, and also that we're supporting individuals to have their voice and to make sure that the research we're doing is the research that our community wants to do. I think working, I'd like to say I'm no longer on the tools as in I'm not a clinical occupational therapist anymore. I teach occupational therapy. I love my teaching. I teach in the mental health unit, and I also teach in the disability unit. And I think going back to our conversation, I remember there was a gentleman when we were at Portsmouth. I was trying to remember his name. I think it might have been Martin Giddy, and I did his disability unit. And again, that was just a step into a brave new world, learning about things such as the social model of disability. But yeah, I suppose trying to answer your question, it's the Zygmunt Bauman comparison. You've got to be a pessimistic optimist. So you have to kind of understand where the needs are to make kind of change.
Yeah, I just wondered, but one of my points behind the word challenging was, is there an ongoing issue with funding, to keep these projects going, to push them further? Is that an ongoing issue?
Yeah, I think anybody who works in research, it's funding is always an ongoing issue, and for every 6 projects that you put up, you might get 1. So it is very competitive, and that's why I think for your listeners perhaps who are looking to think about a research career, it's so important to join into research groups, to get good mentorship, your PhD, like any kind of professional training, it really is just passing your driving test. It's not until you get your driving test that you really start to learn to drive. So again, I think it's so important that as an early career academic, you get good mentorship. Funny enough, I was doing a talk for some academics earlier this week, and again, early career, And I was sort of saying to him, don't be afraid to go and knock on people's doors in the building. And, I was really fortunate after I did my PhD. Not only did I get involved with the autism research, but I was involved with something in Western Australia called the Mental Health Law Centre. And it wasn't a lot of money, the grant. We actually, the organisation paid for us to do the research. But really, that came about from just phoning the organisation up. Hi, I'm Ben. I work for the university. I'm really interested in mental health and recovery. Can I come and have a coffee with you? How can I help you? And you often find if that word, how can I help you, that really does open doors.
Yeah. Can I ask you about one other thing, Ben? Because you also talked
absolutely.
You talked about your work at the university. I know you were involved in a mental health program there. Talk to me. Is that what it's called?
That's right, yeah, and that's been a really wonderful and timely program. Again, from working in our research group, we do a lot of work with researchers in Sweden, and one of the professors in Sweden, Professor Sven Bolte, he's involved in a lot of work around autism and the international classification of functioning. And I'm mindful, Matthew, because this is a sociology podcast, and I'm thinking, what are your listeners? This guy's talking about occupation. How does this relate to sociology? But if you look at some of these frameworks, there's a real living sociology in it. And I can't emphasize the importance of the environment and how that shapes understanding about disability, but how that acts perhaps as barriers as well. And so we were introduced to some colleagues of Sven's in Germany who are part of the German National Suicide Prevention Program, and they had this really great program that they'd been working on in Germany called Talk to Me, which they were using with kids and GPs and social care staff, and they were clinicians, and they said to my colleagues Sonia and Ben, we really we love what we do, but we're not researchers. Can you help us evaluate it? Okay, well, no, we'd be happy to do that. So what we did, we brought the program back, and it's a suicide prevention program, which takes a strengths-based approach, so really aligns to some of the work I was talking about before. And we adapted it to an international context. And again, very important, we had that co-production aspect. So we actually had consumers with lived experience consult on the content, in particular, things like the language. And they sort of said to us, look, this is great, but this is really academic and your audience are just going to get lost. So again, having that lived experience is so important. It shapes and changes the content so other people are going to be able to use it. So we adapted that, and it's about 6 modules long. It's in an online platform called edX. It's actually free. It's available. And we released that in March 2020, just as COVID hit. Yeah. And I think, look, very timely. We got picked up around the world, and to date we've had about 50,000 people enroll in the program. And again, I just think that's incredible that it's helping people. And as I suppose as one participant said to me, who we actually, they agreed to make some promo videos for the program. They said, look, this program is so great because as a student, I don't want to have to do the walk of shame to counselling. I want to be able to take my learning and understand about mental health in my own time and context. And then if I need that extra support, I'll go and do that. But I feel that certainly this notion of having lived experience, and one other thing we did which was quite different, we paid we actually had a person with lived experience consult us on some scripts for some video case studies, and the video case studies we employed actors to kind of have a running narrative throughout the different modules. So for one of and I don't like that word case study, but the person, they very much, it's set up, they've moved from home to university, they're really struggling with their studying, and somebody actually notices that they're having difficulty, and it follows that person as they're learning these skills and applying it with the person who's having that difficulty.
obvious thing to say, but the awareness of mental health, particularly over the last couple of years, like you said, since March 2020, has become so noticeable. I had a student this week, I teach A-level sociology, who was off, and messaged to say, you okay? You sick? You not well? And they said, no, I just needed a mental health day. And it's the first time that I've really seen someone be that open and that direct. And as soon as I read it, that's absolutely fine. I knew what they meant, but that kind of really opened a bit of a door. Like, I've not seen someone say that before. Normally, the person makes an excuse and says, they've been sick, or they're whatever it might be, they've got a cold or whatever. But to be open and explicit and say, no, I needed that mental health day, I hope we are making progress. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
I think we are, Matthew, and I think that what I think is wonderful about the students that I meet is the change in society, that young people now have a lot more language around talking about mental health. And I think that's really powerful. I think where perhaps our program is of use to people is you've got the language, but then what next? And in Australia, we have something called Are You OK Day in September. And it's great, and it raises that awareness. But I've always kind of thought, okay, so what if then you ask somebody, are you okay? Well, no, I'm not okay. What do you do next? And the program we sort of set up, the whole notion of talk to me is when somebody's sort of saying, no, I'm not okay, it's not, well, you need to go and see the GP, you need to go and do this. It's actually using some of those soft skills, those listening skills to be able to support that person and just know that they know you're listening, which it sounds like you exactly did for your student there, which is, again, fantastic.
Yeah, I just wonder if that's something that we might see more of in the future, that you don't have to have this kind of reason or excuse or explanation. If someone's off work or they're not in school, they're not in college.
Yeah, I absolutely, Matthew. I think that the more we have conversations, and it's not necessarily about. I'm not keen to kind of go down that line of strategies to cure. It's about strategies to support people. At the moment in Perth, Western Australia, Omicron is, it's kind of on the rise here. And, I was saying to my students this week, look, if perhaps you have to isolate, just shoot me an email. We can try and work out a way to be able to support you. But if I don't know what's going on, I can't do that. So again, I don't want to get sociological about this, Matthew, but it's the old Jürgen Habermas and talking about, discourse ethics. It's about setting up that dialogue and relationship to be able to people to feel comfortable and to build trust and feel that they can have those conversations.
Yeah, just to counter that, the other side of the coin, I actually had COVID last week, and towards the end of the week, I was feeling a little bit better, and kind of the attitude was, well, you can go back to work, just put a mask on, open the windows, get back on with it. And I thought, well, no, I'm not well. I'm sick.
Yeah.
I'm not on my deathbed, but I wasn't feeling great, and I was sick, and I wasn't mentally ready. And there was still kind of a pressure to get back to work and get on with it. And I took the decision, no, I'm not well. Physically and mentally, I'm not in the right state to go back to work. And I think we need more empathy around those sort of situations.
Absolutely, yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and certainly, I think it's really easy to get into the mindset of, we must keep going on, we must, and just kind of stopping and sort of saying, well, this is where I am, and this is what I can do, and I know my kind of thresholds around that. If we want to kind of take a sort of societal perspective, we are encouraged to do more and more and more and fit so much in. There's what's that expression? Is it a fear of missing out? I think that really kind of does play a big part as well in today's society.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for today, Ben. It's really, really interesting stuff. I always give people the opportunity to give out some details. If people want to find out more about your work or add you on Twitter, are you happy to give some details out, Ben?
Yeah. Now, I'm not on Twitter. I'm a bit naughty. I probably should be, but I just think there's probably one more thing for me to do. So if they want to get in contact, they can email me. So it's ben.milbourn, that's MILBOURN, at Curtin, that's CURTIN, .edu. And if you want to have a look at our work, it's if you go to the Curtin or Google the Curtin Autism Research Group. When I look it up, it's the first hit. You'll see us on there, and there's a little bit about our team and about our research. And we do travel. We again mentioned we do quite a lot of work in Sweden. My colleague Sonia's she's had some contact with Autistica, who are based in the United Kingdom, and I caught up with them a few years ago prior to COVID. But yeah, we're always really interested to connect with people. If people are interested in further study, likewise, if they're interested in getting involved in research, or even, I think, just making that first step, because I don't know if you remember, Matthew, but PhD was not the first thing on my mind when I was doing my undergraduate degree. And if you'd said to me, in 20 years' time, I'd done a PhD and would be doing research, I just wouldn't have believed it. So I think it's really, really important that we are kind of supporting people to find pathways and pathways into academia and research, because, like my colleague says, I don't know if I can keep doing this the rest of my life. And, you want to sort of bring people and carry on the good stuff, Yeah,
definitely. Well, Ben, it's the afternoon. I've got to go back and teach some more lessons, and I think it's probably time for you to go to bed at your end, isn't it?
It is, yeah. No, it is. My son will be up about 6 o'clock, so it is time. So no, it's been really wonderful, Matthew, and thank you so much for having me on the show. And I think for myself and a lot of your listeners, I think it's a great show. So well done.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate your time, and thanks for taking me back down memory lane. Portsmouth in the 90s. There you go.
Play up Pompey, hey?
Thanks so much again, Ben. Take care.
No worries. Thank you.
Bye now.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.